Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Albers, and welcome to This Week in Anderson on the Big Eye Sports Podcast on USBN Sports. And always, I'm joined with my co-host, Steve Ellis. And Steve, our next guest, I'm really, really excited to have joining us. I had the privilege of coaching with this guy and also doing our Redskin review shows. And always on my review shows and when I coach, I was always fired up. And I'm sure today, after we do this, we're going to be a little fired up after this interview.
Well, let me tell you something, Danny. This gentleman we're going to interview here is, without a doubt, the biggest impactful person, coach, teacher, friend that this community has had in probably 50 years. I mean, from the community to the school and, quite frankly, to the other sports within the school.
Yep.
He completely changed the culture and for years and generations. And so that's how much of an impact that this guy's had and how much respect that everybody, including you and me, have for this guy.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's a great comment. We're going to kind of get into some of the accomplishments right now with Vince. Vince, first of all, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
No, thank you guys for having me, and thank you, Steve, you guys, for the kind words. It may be a little overrated, but
No.
I appreciate the kind words. And doing this interview is not nearly as much stress as doing those games for Spectrum and High School Athletic Association. Those are a little more stressful. You can't make any mistakes. So
I heard you're a natural.
Yeah.
I practice that stuff a lot before I get on TV.
I bet you do.
Vince, you did a great job. And let's kind of get in a little bit that, some of his stats: 147 and 61, 300 feet of seasons as Anderson, conference champions 12 out of 20 seasons, state playoffs 7 times, top 10, 15 out of 20 seasons. Vince,
Wow.
It's just an incredible thing to look at. And that, to me, is an amazing bio, considering I played in the time right before you got there, knowing where Anderson was and what you've brought. Just incredible accomplishments for what you have done at Anderson High School.
Dan, I always tell people I think I came in at the perfect storm, because I think the people, the kids, the school, the parents, they were all looking for something different to change for whatever reason, whatever direction they were going. And they were looking for something different. And I had been involved, the hometown that I came from in Martins Ferry in the early 1960s was one of the top football programs in the United States. And it was such a top football program that they were in Life magazine.
Wow.
And they had broken the record for consecutive wins in the state of Ohio. Now, that was before the playoffs started. And then what happened was, I entered junior high, and just as I entered junior high, the bottom starts to fall out. And it's just like anything else. So they went on this great string of winning all these games, and it was the number one thing in the community. To now, I get in junior high, and it goes like 3-7, 1-9, and then I'm a freshman in high school, and Martins Ferry goes 0-10. So they fire that coach. They bring in a new coach. I'm now a sophomore. I'm the JV quarterback and the JV free safety, and they go 0-10 again. And we finish with like 21 kids on the football team. And then they fire that coach and bring in a new coach, who was Larry Coyer, who ended up coaching in the Super Bowl for the Indianapolis Colts and also for the Denver Broncos. And he was 25 years old when he came in, and we went 2-8. And we broke the losing streak. They had a 27-game losing streak. And then my senior year, we lost our first 2 games, and then we went on a run and started winning a lot of games. And then I left and went to college, and the bottom fell out again. And so as I get out of college, a guy named Bob Brunick played for Woody Hayes at Ohio State, who was a star at Martins Ferry when that winning streak started, hires me. And he had built that program at Ironton, which you guys all know about. Ironton football. He had come in and done at Ironton what I did at Anderson. And so they hire him in Martins Ferry, and he taught me the format. I was 21 years old when he hired me, and that's why I'm telling you this story. He showed me, all of us, the format of how to build that program. So gradually we built that program back up. Like I got hired in 1974 and we went 3-7 the first year, then 6-4 the next year, then 7-3. And you can see that in 1979, we went undefeated. And I'll never forget, being very frustrated. One night I was talking, this is a pretty good story. I was talking to Crystal. We were sitting at the Outback eating. And I said, Crystal, I said, I really don't understand why God put me through that. I said, I loved football so much. I was such a dedicated athlete, didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't do anything. It worked out all the time, worked on all my sports. And he put me through, I said, that was hell, being in that town and going 0-10 as a sophomore and 2-8 as a junior in a town that was in Life magazine. I said, I just can't ever understand why God put me through that. And I loved the game so much. And I loved that town so much that I had to go through that. And she said something very astounding to me. She looked at me and says, you don't know why God put you through that? I went, no, I don't. She said, when you walked in that locker room at Anderson in 1987, she says, what did you see? It was 20 years from you being a sophomore at Martins Ferry High School and them being 0-10. What did you see? She goes, when you looked at those kids, that was you 20 years ago. And inside of you, you knew exactly how to handle those kids because you knew what you felt like as a person. And one of the things that they did to us that I never did to the kids at Anderson was they always made us feel that the reason we were losing was because we didn't want it bad enough, we weren't tough enough, and we didn't work hard enough. And when somebody does that to you when you're 14, 15, and 16 years old, that has a tremendous effect on you mentally and the way you look at yourself. And I remember how I felt and how long it took me to get over that there was something wrong with me, the way we were losing. And when I got into Anderson, I knew I was never going to do that to those kids. I was never going to walk in that locker room and tell Matt Bailey and Steve Green and Corey Mitchell and those kids, Jay Sullivan, that the reason they were losing was because they weren't tough enough and didn't want it enough. Because once I got to college and had to go against some of those kids that I had played high school football, I found out that I was every bit as tough as them and worked hard, if not tougher and worked harder than they did. But I didn't know that at 16 years old. And then when we started winning my senior year, I got to feel what it felt like to transition from losing to winning. And that was the innate feeling that I wanted to do with those kids. That's why I never, ever tore them down. Never. And now, did I yell them at practice and push them? Absolutely, because I knew the level that they had to get to be successful, and it was my job to push them to that level. But I understood mentally what everybody was going through, and I think that was a huge advantage. And when I say I came in at the perfect storm, people wanted to change from where they were. And I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not saying there was anything wrong with anybody. And the one thing I did learn is when you are losing, there's not one reason or one person why you're losing. There are a lot of reasons and a lot of people. And when you are winning, it's the same thing. Like you guys give me a lot of credit for what we did and everything, but it wasn't just me. It was a lot of people. It was a lot of players. It was a lot of parents. It was the administration. There were a lot of people that made that thing turn and go right. And if I can ramble for a second, after my first year, and this was really something that was really significant. After my first year, we went 1-9. So it wasn't 13 losing seasons anymore. It was 14. And I went in and what I did was right after the season, I sat down and I made a list of the things that I thought needed to change in the Forest Hills School District and in Anderson High School Athletic Department for us to be successful. And they weren't huge things, but I listed 24 things. And I asked to have a meeting with Mr. Hall. And I did. And I sat down and I had a copy of those 24 things for me and a copy of those 24 things for him. Now you gotta remember, I was 35 years old. I was really young. And I handed him, I said, Mr. Hall, I said, you guys brought me in 3 times to interview for me to be very explicit and tell you exactly what I was going to do to help turn this football program around. I says, and I told you everything that I thought I could do. And you guys liked it enough to hire me. I says, and I'm still going to do those things. I says, but since I've been in here now for 6 months, I see some things that are inherently wrong in our philosophy and the way we're running things. And I says, and they're on that list and we're going to go over them. But I'm going to tell you what, if those things don't get changed on this list, I said, Newt Rockney's not going to win here. And he looked at me and I looked at him and I says, now I'm going to explain them to you. And they were very simple things. It wasn't like we all need raises. We need brand new. There wasn't anything like that. Like the very first one I had on there is we didn't have a trainer. So Randy Corbett had, and I was explaining this to him. I said, Randy Corbett had to tape the ankles and treat our guys because at practice we didn't have a trainer. I says, now how am I supposed to have a defensive line meeting or an offensive line meeting before practice, before we go out, if my offensive line coach and defensive line coach is taping ankles? I said, that doesn't work. And then the other thing was I had very young coaches and I was trying to run a college program. That's what I was bringing in. And most of the guys on my staff had never seen a college football practice. I said, you have to let me take these guys for 3 or 4 days and go to a major college and let them see how a major college football program is run and be able to meet with those coaches at their positions and see philosophically how that works. I says, they have no idea of the tempo, the intensity, and neither do the players of how this is all supposed to work. And then I talked to him about the schedule and about, and I thought the junior high schedule was too hard. And I thought that we were perpetuating losing because we were always playing schools that were bigger than us at the junior high and level. And by the time the kids got to high school, they had already lost the majority of their games. And I said, we're perpetuating losing. And I said, we need to look at who we're playing and at least give us, I says, I'm not asking you to schedule people that we can beat 9 out of 10 years. I says, I'm just asking you to give me a 50% chance. Just give me a chance to go 50-50. I'll take care of the rest. And it was really ironic. By the time we got to this next season, because this was in November when I met with him, by the time we got to July, August of the upcoming season, he had met 16 of the 24.
Wow.
And next season, 2 years out from that meeting, he had met all 24.
That's incredible.
And that's, and you give credit to, I had enough insight to see what we needed to do. And he had enough courage to carry it through.
Right.
And it was like one of them was hiring teachers. Like I would have guys that wanted to coach it because when I got there, not very many people wanted to coach at Anderson High School. It was hard for me to come in and get guys like they would look, like they're losing. I don't want to coach there. And then when I did find somebody, I had to match it up with a teaching job many times. And a lot of times they go for the interview and then we wouldn't hire that coach. We'd hire somebody else. I said, if it's even close to another person, let's hire the coach because they can do more things for the school. And it was just little things like that. We were, and eventually it worked out. And then, then the organization and work ethic helped carry it through. But that was how it got, it all got started, and I had that background with Bob Bruni and Dave Bruni because Bob left after 5 years at Martins Ferry. He retired. And then my best friend, Dave Bruni, took over. And we, in the first year we were together, we went undefeated. And, and so I had a chance to install, learn about how to do that. And then I got my first head coaching job at Caddis, where they were already winning. Caddis had won, when I got to Caddis, they had won 45 out of 50 football games in 5 years. And that was back then when they only took 2 to the playoffs. So they hadn't been to the playoffs yet because they started with only taking 2 to the playoffs, then 4. Then later on, when I was at Anderson, they went to 8. But they had won 45 out of 50 games. And I was able to take my program there and install it. Even though they had won that many games, they were winning on a lot of physical ability. They were really talented. And then I was able to systemize it and put it in there. And so I knew the system would work when I got to Anderson. And I was probably a little naive at 34 years old. I thought I could do it, instantaneously. And it didn't work like that.
Coach,
So
how did it all start with coming to Anderson? Because you got to pick up your family, and I mean, did you know about Anderson? Were you looking to move on, or how did that all come about?
okay, this is kind of funny because Danny knows the story. When I was the head coach at Caddis, back there, just like every other, you have your coaches associations, and they had to pick somebody to coach in the All Ohio game from our district. And back then, the All Ohio game was a lot bigger than it is now because kids didn't leave in June to go to their college for the summer. They didn't do that back then. They didn't leave till August. So all the college coaches would come watch the practices, and then you played the last weekend in July. Then those kids would leave and go to college. So you had kids that would go on to be All-Americans and, shoot Heisman Trophy candidates in those games. So it was big. Well, when they voted back home in Eastern Ohio, I came in second. And the guy who came in first was a guy named Reno Sakosh, the head coach of Steubenville Big Red, who's a huge power in the eastern side of Ohio. And he said, I've done this before. Vince is new in the field, new as a head coach. Let's let Vince do it. I've already done it before. I don't need to do it again. So I was supposed to be the alternate. Then they made me the coach. And back here, a guy named Lou Sincar, who was the coach at Forest Park, came in second down here. And the guy who was first didn't want to do it.
Wow.
So Lou became the guy from the Southwest Ohio. So we have to go to Columbus to pick the team and watch all the film on the kids. And Lou walks in, and he walks in the door, and he says, looks at me and goes, me and you, we're roommates. I'm going to take care of you and show you the ropes. Wow. And I was like, who is this guy?
Wow.
And so we become roommates, and we're very good friends. Back then, now you stayed in Massillon for 2 weeks. It was 2-a-days for 2 weeks. Then you played the game. So wow. Lou and I became really good friends and, would talk a lot of football and go out and became really good friends. And so after the game, as we were leaving, the area back there, that was when the steel mills started going down. It was steel mill country and coal mining country, and they were all going under. And the area was starting to become depressed, and I knew I had to get out of there. And I said to Lou, I said, if there are any jobs, this is before we got in our cars to drive home. I said, Lou, if there are ever any jobs in Cincinnati that open up that you think I would be interested in, I says, please call me and let me know. And so 6 months later, it's the Ohio State-Michigan game, and Harbaugh is the quarterback for Michigan, and Lou calls me on the phone, like on a Tuesday or Wednesday. He says, Vince, I've got 4 tickets for the Ohio State-Michigan game. My wife, Karen, and I are going. Would you and Crystal like to go to the game with us and meet us in Columbus? I said, yes, absolutely. Ohio State-Michigan game. And so we pull in. We actually met with the basketball arena then was the French Field House. And we actually met in the parking lot, and he told me about where he would be. And we met, and I get out of the car, and he points to me, and he says, I got a job for you in Cincinnati. I says, who? And he says, Anderson High School in Cincinnati. I said, I've never heard of the place. He said, that's because they're not very good. He says, they suck. He says, but if they get a guy like you, it's young and enthusiastic and energetic and has done all those things that build a program. He says, they've got talent in that school. He says, I know, I coach against them in football and track. He says, they've got athletes there. They can win. And he says, you ought to go for the job. So I did. Wow. Now, luckily, Tom Kasika was at Turpin. And at the time, Tom Kasika was the Southwest representative for the state, and he was best friends with Lou. So, and it's kind of really funny how it all worked out. So he knew me, and he could vouch for me, in terms of the administration in Forest Hills, because he had watched me coach. Right. The other thing that happened was when I was at Caddis, Mr. Hall was the principal at Little Miami. And Little Miami was undefeated and came to Caddis to play us. And they stayed the night, and they came up on the bus, and Mr. Hall was at the game, and Little Miami was 4-0, and we beat them. Wow. They were undefeated, and we beat them. And so when my name came across his desk, he knew who I was, and he saw that Caddis High School, And I've seen this guy coach. That's when they called me and they asked me to come down. And I actually came down like on President's Day when we were off school and had my first interview.
That's just a crazy.
So there's really a backstory.
That's a great story. Wow.
Yeah, if Lou and I never coached together in that All-Star game, I'd have never known about it.
So what was your initial thoughts, when you interviewed, saw the facilities and everything?
I'll never forget coming up 5 Mile Road and turning right at the light and seeing the vastness of Beachmont Avenue, because Martins Ferry and Caddis were just little towns.
Right.
I mean, they looked maybe like Reading, just little towns. That's how it's exactly how it is. They were coal mining, and Caddis was a coal mining town, and Martins Ferry was a steel mill town. The steel mill was in the town, and they were and I looked at the vastness of Beachmont Avenue, and I looked at Crystal and I said, look at this. How can they not be winning? And I didn't quite understand. Really, there were a lot of other good football teams out there in places like Anderson. But when I looked, to me, it was just so huge, because there's nothing that looks like Anderson back in the Valley. They're all just one little town connected to another little town.
Okay.
And when I interviewed, the thing that came across to me was that they really wanted to be successful. And the people wanted to be successful. And I just don't think they were sure exactly how to do it. And they were looking for a process, not necessarily the person, but maybe the person who could bring in the process that they were looking for. And the way we had done things in Eastern Ohio was completely different than the way they were doing things here. Like, for instance, when I got to Anderson and ran a football camp in July, a 10-day football camp, nobody was doing that in Cincinnati, but maybe Moeller. And so, you know what I'm saying? So that was all new, where you actually practice your guys for 10 days. Nobody was doing that, and then and really, I had a mandatory weight program. You're not allowed to do that. And I didn't really tell them it was mandatory, but, I told them if we have any chance of being successful, we all have to get here. We all have to do it. That was the weight program was the foundation, because I felt you built everything through the weight program, that they would develop pride, they would develop unity, cohesiveness, and it would become very important to them, and they wouldn't want to give up. And not only that, they would build physical strength and be much bigger and stronger and faster. And that was exactly what happened. But that's why it took a little bit of time, because it took those kids that were freshmen to get to the point, and then we stayed systemized, where, one of the things that people have a tendency to do, and this happened to me when I was a sophomore in high school and we went 0-10, is when things are going bad, you keep wanting to change everything. And the more you change, the less good you are at something. And, I said, we are going to run the I formation, and we are going to run the 50 defense, which today is a 3-4 defense, but back then they called it the 50 defense. And we're going to run that all the way through, from senior through 7th grade. And these kids are going to know it inside and out, and we're going to plug the kids into the positions so they fit in what our system and what we want to be. Now, another key factor in that was I had complete control of the junior high program. So I had complete control of who I hired, how we did it, what they were supposed to do. And so everyone could be systemized all the way from top to bottom. So
who was telling us that, Danny? Was it Nate Cosman saying that, one of the things that, when it probably wasn't Nate, but that was the first ones that when Anderson was 7 through 12 in the high school?
It was Nate.
Was it? Yeah. So you basically had control of the whole.
Yes, I did. So I had, I had Jason Bell, Joe Dunn, Jason Druso, Nate Cosman. See, and another thing that happened was I became so close to those kids when I first got to Anderson, they gave me most of the junior high phys ed classes. So now I had a relationship with those kids while they were really very young. And not only that, but I could evaluate them in gym class of who should go where. And this is a crazy story about Louis Andriadis. My class and Mrs. Prem's class, we were playing mat ball together. And this is like maybe my second or third week in the school. And she had I had an 8th grade class and she had an 8th grade class, and we're playing mat ball, and this kid named Louis kicks the ball and starts running around the bases in mat ball, and he's phenomenal. Like, not only is he super fast, but they can't hit him with the ball. He's like, I can see he's a tremendous athlete. And I says to Priscilla, Priscilla, who is that kid? And she goes, oh, that's Louis Andriatis. And I says, wow. And she says, he plays football on the junior high team. I says, really? So he crosses his own plate, and I says, Louis? I says, come here. I says, you play junior high football? He says, yeah. I says, what position do you play? And he says, I'm a guard. I said, not anymore. You're the tailback. And that's how I put him at tailback. I watched him play mat ball because they put him at guard because Will was playing guard.
No kidding.
And so they figured he was a guard. And I says, not anymore. You're the tailback. And that's how he became the tailback.
No kidding.
Wow.
That's a great story. I never knew that one.
Yeah, so I could evaluate all those kids in junior high and start to place them, and then talk to the coaches and say, okay, now,
right.
This is where he's going to be in the long run.
That's a great, hey, Vince, we obviously the 92 team and the 07 team in Anderson are probably undoubtedly, one of the two teams that everybody talks about in Anderson high school history, and rightfully so. You were a big part of that. The 92 team kind of started the program. Not that it wasn't getting the recognition before that, but it kind of really started. And if you really want to go back, you say the 91 team too as well, even though they, but you were a part of the beginning stages, and then hitting the ultimate peak for any high school to have and winning a state championship, even though you weren't the coach of that team. How gratifying was that for you to be a part of building that 92 team and the program that you built, and then seeing it, with the ultimate getting the state championship?
Oh, they both brought tears to my eyes. You just, to sit there and see, those kids win that state championship in 07, and, you look down and it was many of your staff members, and what a great job they had done of carrying on. And, they tweaked what they wanted to tweak to make it their system, but it was very gratifying to see those kids finally reach the ultimate goal. And the 92 team was special too, because like we just talked, I had those kids from the time they were 7th graders. And, and what happened was, like, that 7th and 8th grade bunch of kids that I had in phys ed, well, in my 3rd year, then they moved me and gave me most of the high school classes. So then I moved right with them. So when they had to take high school phys ed, I'm still their teacher. So the relationship that I had built with those kids was so strong. And that's why I was so emotional, when you see me give that speech at that pep rally. And I told you I had sat at my desk and cried before I came up and gave that speech, because I was so afraid that I might let those kids down and not coach a good enough game to get them undefeated and get them to the state playoffs, that I broke down and I started crying.
Yeah.
Sitting at my desk, and I'm just, tears are rolling down my face. And they knocked on that door in my office. Remember, I was above the weight room, and I said, Coach, they're ready for you at the pep assembly. And I dried my eyes, and I had that note card with my speech written in there. And I walked in there, and I didn't say one thing that was on that note card. One thing. I just started speaking from the heart. It's just like, it was almost like something washed over me and told me what to say. And I just started talking from the heart. And everything that I said was not on that note card. It was just how I felt, and after I gave that speech and I got it out, I was fine. I went to that game that night with Harrison. I was perfectly calm. I was focused. I was, I didn't feel any pressure. I think I got it out in that pep rally, well,
I don't know, Vince, which pep rally was better, was that one or the very first one that you were introduced at Anderson? Because, you want to talk about, the community wanting, that we're starving for a winning football program, a winning attitude, and just ready for it. first impact that you made on me and everybody else, my parents, everybody, that at that pep rally, and if you remember this, Danny, you could hear a pin drop. And by the end, you not only knew who Vince was, but you were ready to run through a wall.
Absolutely.
I mean, just completely. And so, yeah, that was an unbelievable one, Vince, about before the Harrison game. But that first one is what, drove the car with everybody, that everybody was like, yes, here we are. We got our guy. Here we go.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and then we went out and lost our first game 47-0 to Forest Park. Yeah, that was, and yeah, that was a rude awakening. And
That's funny.
but
funny.
in fairness, Lou Sinkar had 5 Division I athletes on that football team that went to Notre Dame and Tennessee, and they were Power 5 conference kids.
Yeah.
And
That's funny.
yeah, so but So,
well, I'm guessing one of the 24 items that you had on that list for Mr. Hall was a weight room.
Mm-hmm.
Because when Danny and I, we had a closet basically.
Yeah, we did.
Right.
Vince, I can't remember when you were there. Was that closet still the weight room? Didn't we make it the maintenance, the old maintenance?
So whatever that maintenance garage was. Yeah, that was it. That was all the room we had. So we made the best of it, and it was that way till 2000 when they built the other addition to the building.
Yeah.
Right.
We were lifting in the halls, and at one point when we had 105 kids on the team, we had to have 2 lifting sessions. We went from 3 to 4:30 and 4:30 to 6. I had to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, Vince, you were there for 20 years, and we were all so thankful. And, I think in everybody's back of their mind was wondering, okay, this guy is too good for us. He's going to move on because he's such a great coach. And after 20 years, you had decided to make the jump, and you went to Mount St. Joe, and you went on to UC. How did that all come about, and what made that decision to leave Anderson at that point?
Well, first of all, it was extremely hard to leave Anderson. It was the hardest professional decision I made in my life. But here's what happened. After being there for 20 years, I knew that I was coming to the end of my career, really. My 2 sons were gone, and I knew that I was going to be retiring. Well, in fact, I was already retired from teaching. And I just didn't know how much longer I had in coaching. And I had always wanted to go to college and coach just to experience it and see what it was like when all you had to do was work on football all day.
Right.
And, because I loved, it's not that I didn't like teaching school, but my passion was football. Yep. And so the thing that I was worried about, that I would get out of coaching and never had that chance to just experience what it was like. And so when Rod Huber called, he said, Vince, I know you've always wanted to get in, because I had turned down jobs prior to that. In 1996, Miami, ironically, when Sean Payton left Miami called me to be the quarterback coach.
Wow.
And I turned it down. Michael was going to be a senior, and he was one of the co-captains, and I didn't want to walk out on his senior year. Not only I loved Anderson, but I was, it's just like anything else. Those kids that all grew up around Michael, I knew him, and didn't want to walk out on our senior year. And then at the end of the 2000 football season, if you remember, that was the year we had put the spread in. Jim Grobe at OU left and went to Wake Forest, and one of his assistants got the job named Brian Knorr, and he told Brian, he said, Brian, the first hire you need to make is Vince Suriano out of Anderson High School. He says, if I was ever going to hire one guy, that's the guy I would hire, and I would make him my offensive coordinator of what he's doing with that spread offense. So Brian called me. I'm in gym class, and he calls me and offers me the job. He says, now we're going to bring you down for an interview, but the job is yours. You have it. We just want to see what you're going to do. And so I took Crystal and Christopher down. Again, it's going into Christopher's senior year. He had been a ball boy with me from the time we got here. He was 5 years old, And he had been in the program since he was 5. Now he was going to be a senior and one of the captains. And what happened was they brought me down. It was right before Christmas. On Christmas Eve, I called him back the morning of Christmas Eve at the end of 2000. And I said, Brian, I'm honored that you would ask me to do this. And I love to OU and I would love to do it. I said, but I only have one son left, and this is my last chance to coach him. I will never have another chance to coach one of my sons, but I may have another chance to go into college football. I said, so based on that, I'm going to turn it down and stay at Anderson and coach that class. Because those were all kids, the Michael Morelands, those kids were, Anthony Macy, they were all running around in my backyard from the time they were in elementary school. And I just couldn't walk out on those kids. Yeah. And so I stayed. And so when the thing came up in February of 2007, it was, Vince, you've turned them down before. You're coming to the end of your career. It's time to do something so you can at least experience something different. Now, that being said, whatever your next question is, I enjoyed coaching in college, but we were at the University of Cincinnati Division I football, and I realized why I was a high school coach. And I don't mean this to be demeaning by any sense against the University of Cincinnati, but I always tell people this story where, they call it the epiphany, when you get hit in the face with something. I'm sitting in a staff meeting, and we're in a big staff meeting at UC, and we want to bring in, I think it was Gunnar Keel from Notre Dame. Gunnar was a freshman at Notre Dame, but we didn't have any more room for any quarterbacks. And we're sitting at the staff table, and Tubbs says, well, I will talk. At the time was our third or fourth string quarterback. He says, I will talk to him and tell him we would like for him to transfer. I'll find a place for him to transfer, at a little lower level school where he can play. He says, and then we'll have room for Gunnar. And we're all kind of sitting there, and he could tell that everybody was kind of in shock over this and he says, look, guys, this is $1 million business. This needs to be run like $1 million business, a multi-million-dollar business. He said, and that's what we have to do to win into multi-million-dollar business. And just then it hit me in the face sitting in that staff meeting. That's why I was a high school football coach, because it wasn't about the money and the TV and that with me. It was about the kids. I was doing it because I loved the kids and I wanted to develop them. And I was never going to give up on a kid, ever. Right. And then I saw the difference between being in college and being at high school that you never saw from the outside in watching it on TV. And then I just knew, that's why I was there. I was a high school coach for 33 years. That's why I was there.
Wow. So you talked about your boys. How was that coaching them, and how gratifying was that watching them succeed? Growing up, like you said, at Anderson, and then actually getting to coach them at Anderson.
That was the greatest experience of my life. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing, if I did something right in handling them in that situation, was I treated them exactly like the other kids. I wasn't any harder on them, and I wasn't any easier on them. I treated them just like they were the center on, or the right guard, or whatever. Yep. And when we got home, now usually I stayed after practice and watched our practice tape, but when I got home, we never rehashed the practice or the game or anything. I didn't do that with them because I figured any other kid that went home didn't have to do that with his dad, that I wasn't going to make them. Now, if they brought it up at the dinner table, then we would discuss it. But if they didn't bring it up, we didn't do it. So therefore, we had a good relationship and they enjoyed their experience. I wanted them to enjoy it and not dread it because dad's on their back so hard.
Yeah.
And to this day, I mean, they love Anderson football. The sun rises and sets on Anderson football. You know, they got all their memorabilia in their rec rooms and on the walls, and they got their helmets and you know, and all that stuff. So, you know, it was a great experience for them, and just treated them like everybody else.
That's great. That's great. You know, part of you're talking about how your kids are feeling about Anderson. You know, we interviewed Joe Dunn recently, and he talked about, you know, his success at Indiana State and everything that he did. And he says nothing compares to the fun and the success and his memories that he had at Anderson. You know, that's how impactful and important Anderson was to him.
You know, and I feel the same way. I tell people those were the 20 greatest years of my coaching career. Now, did I not have fun at the other places? Yes. Did I not enjoy my experience at the University of Cincinnati? Yes. But nothing was like the experience at Anderson High School. It just, you know, and I said this at a football clinic one time, and it really shocked the people sitting in the audience. I was speaking in Indianapolis at a clinic, and the room was packed because the title of my speech at the seminar was what I would do differently if I went back to high school football. So I had a whole PowerPoint and went over everything that since I've gotten into college and gotten away from high school football, that what I learned in college, if I went back, what would I do differently? And I went through the whole thing. And at the end, I was standing there and I said, and I looked out in the audience and I says, you know, guys, I said, not so long ago, I says, I was sitting out there. I says, I'm going to tell you something. I says, and you look at me and I got the real expensive coaching shirt on, and I've got the bowl ring on my finger. And I said, you see me with the, you know, the $90 shoes on and coaching pants and everything. And I says, and I was sitting there, I says, and I used to say, sitting in that audience, oh, one day I'm going to be like that. I'm going to have all that stuff. I'm going to get on an airplane instead of a yellow school bus, and I'm going to fly to Dallas and coach. And I says, I was so enamored with that I wanted to experience that one day. I says, but let me tell you something. At the time, I think I was 61 years old. 62 I was. I says, I'm 62 years old. I says, and if God came in this room right now and says, Vince, I let you do it all. You're 62 years old. I let you be an assistant in high school. I let you be a head coach in high school. I let you coach in Division III college. I let you coach in Division I. And now I'm going to take you back, and you're 42 years old, and I'm going to let you pick what you want to be. I said, what are you going to pick? And I looked at them in the audience and I says, you know what I'm going to pick? And I was yelling. He says, you know what I'm going to pick? I want to be you. I'm going back to be you. Wow. That's what I want to be.
Nice.
Said, because you have the greatest influence on kids that anybody has at any level. You have the most impact and change their lives. I want to be you. Wow. You could have heard a pin drop. And I said, be proud of what you are. Cherish it. Because I miss that and would love to be you again.
Wow.
You
could have. I don't know if I'd have been quiet. I'd have been jumping off the table and flipping the table. I'd have been ready to
well,
go.
they did. They stood up and all started clapping, you know. But that was how I felt in my heart. That was exactly how I felt.
So, Vince, I'd be remiss if I don't bring this up. That you talk about your sons, but you're going throughout your career and how all the success you've had. The unsung hero in this whole equation here is got to be Crystal.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
How much of an impact and savior has she been for you?
Yeah, she was always there. She was always supportive. But what I tell people, not only that was, you know, I guess in a marriage, there's like 100% of the things that you do. In some marriages, it's 50-50. You share the responsibilities. It was probably 90-10 with her. She took care of 90% of the things, if not more, in our marriage. And I took care of the other 5 or 10%, which allowed me to spend the time that I needed to spend developing that program and the kids and strategically learning football and going to clinics and doing all those things that you needed to do. Like on spring break, we never went to Florida. I got in a car in spring break and I would go to Michigan, or I would go to Tennessee, or I would go to Penn State, and I'd spend 4 or 5 days at those places and learn those things, so that I could bring them back and put it in Anderson High School. Well, and so, yeah, and she was every bit with me, every facet of the journey.
Oh yeah.
Just, Steve knows that impact too with his wife, Donna, obviously has to do that with Steve coaching basketball. So, and I'd have to say the same thing with myself too, because my wife puts up with a lot of my broadcasting and all the things that I do. So, it's important to have that support system like we all have.
You look at every really good coach that has had success, there is somebody behind them that is taking care of all the other things. And
you got that right.
Me.
Yeah. So Vince, let's kind of get to where we're at now. I know that you've talked earlier about doing quarterback camps. So you're doing that right now.
I'm doing, I just tutor them. I usually do them individually.
Yeah.
So I do individual sessions with the quarterbacks. And, fortunately, the kids that I've coached have had a lot of success. Zach Branham at LaSalle and Brogan Mackay at St. X and Jackson Kuhn, or just, the sophomore quarterback at Kings now, Will Coker. I'm training him and
that's awesome.
I just started training Turpin's quarterback, Will Shulock. Now, right now, because we just talked before this thing, I'm kind of on hold because I'm supposed to have spinal surgery Tuesday. So I've got it on hold. And he told me I could possibly be back within 6 weeks, and then I'll pick it up again. And then, hopefully I'll be good to continue all the way till their season starts. So, and then, the writing of the books.
I was just getting ready to ask you about that.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun doing those 2 books. And I felt the second book was better than the first, just because I had a little more experience doing it. And they were allowing, the first book, I wasn't allowed to use the word I, me, or we. So I couldn't put a lot of personal anecdotes in there. But the second book they did, and that one was developing a football program from A to Z, a model for success. And, in fact, there it is.
Yeah, look at that.
Nice.
There it is.
Love it.
And so I was able to, all the things that we did in the Anderson program are all in chapters. And because that was the biggest building of a program, like I said, when I got to Caddis, they were 45-5. So yeah, you do have to build your part of the program, but it wasn't so. And that's probably the last book I'll write. And then, this thing with Spectrum News of doing the color commentating for the high school football games kind of come out of nowhere. And now, I did 10 games this year, and then the state championship game. So, that's kind of taken up my time. So
you did a great job, Vince. And I got to watch a couple of your games, and I told you in one of our, pregame and halftime shows, I watched I believe it was the Princeton Lakota West game, I think, or Lakota West and somebody, and you called exactly the 3 plays in a row that you said they're going to do this, and they actually did the same plays that you said they were going to do. It was amazing. To me, it was amazing. I was just like, here's this guy that just comes in broadcasting like it's nothing, and he picks out what they're going to call. I'm lucky if I come close to calling one play.
And then the funny thing it kind of happened like that in that state championship game that I was doing between Van Wert and Mentor Lake Catholic. And the score was tied 28-28, and Mentor Lake Catholic had the ball on the 30-yard line, and it was 3rd down, and there was only like 2 minutes to go in the game. And I said, look, as a coach here in this situation, I'm going to be very careful. I said, I'm either going to run the ball and punt it away to flip the field and play for overtime, or I'm going to throw a ball down the sidelines deep in case it is intercepted. I said, it's like a punt. I said, but the place I'm not going to throw the ball is over the middle. I said, because if it gets picked, that team has time to go down and score because they have a short field now.
Right.
And sure enough, the kid threw a dig pass right in the middle of the field. It got picked at the 50-yard line. Van Wert in 2 plays went from the 50 to the 25. Then they drove it down to the 7, had it 4th and 4 with 16 seconds left, brought a sophomore field goal kicker out. They had not attempted a field goal all year. He had never kicked a field goal. They bring this little sophomore out. He kicks it over. It goes over the crossbar with 9 seconds left. They win the state championship.
Yeah,
Wow.
That's incredible.
How about that?
That's awesome, Vince. That you give that aspect of it. That is incredible. You know, we're gonna try to wrap this up, and the thing that we always do, a couple things we always try to do on these things is talk about some memorable moments, and kind of give you a heads up on this one, just because I didn't want to leave you on the spot a little bit. But talk a little bit about like your most memorable high school moment as a coach, and then maybe as a college coach too as well.
Well, I think there are 2 for me at Anderson, and there's probably a lot, but there's 2 that kind of jump off the screen. It's winning that Princeton game in '92 in the snow in the playoffs. And I'll tell you the 2 games, and then I'll tell you why. And then winning that one because that was my 40th birthday, you know, and Anderson had never been in the playoffs, never won a playoff game. And then the other game was when we beat Moeller in the Crosstown Showdown in 2003. And the reason being, number one, that 92 win, the reason for both of those is because nobody thought we could win either one of those games. Like when that came out that Anderson was going to play Princeton, you guys were, it was like, oh my God, Anderson High School has to play Princeton. Are you kidding me? Do you realize what a slaughter that will be?
Yeah.
No one gave us a chance to even compete in that game. And then when we beat Moeller, it was the same thing. No one thought Anderson could ever even come close to Moeller. In fact, there was a player, Christopher was a student assistant at Miami, and one of the linebackers was from Moeller, and he came up to Christopher and said, hey, Chris Suriano, he says, you believe your dad's team Anderson's going to play Moeller? Can you believe how bad they're going to get beat that they would even give him that matchup? And, you know, and we beat him. And I'll never forget what I told the kids. You talk about a pregame talk. It might have been one of my best pregame talks. When the 2003 team played Moeller, our kids, when we left Anderson and got on the bus, there wasn't one person that said one word. They were so focused and so really nervous about that game. And I got them in the locker room and I said, hey guys, I said, look, I know what you're thinking. You're sitting here thinking all about the history, the tradition, all the state championships of Moeller, and you're thinking about that, and now you have to go out and play that team. I said, let me tell you something. I know Moeller has great tradition, and I know they've won state championships. I said, but you know what? I says, you're not playing those teams. You're not playing those state championships. You're playing against those kids that are across the hall in that locker room over there. I says, and I got to tell you something. I believe the players in this locker room sitting here are better than the players that are sitting in that room over there. Now, all we have to do is go out and prove it. Let's go do it.
Yes, sir.
Man.
That was the way I approached it.
No,
and that was what I believed.
No, that's,
you know,
it
the Matty Mullinaxes, the Kurt Shoemakers, the Jeff Gannums, those kids sitting in that room were better, I felt, than those kids sitting in that locker room over there. I says, I've watched you every day. And we went out and won.
That's awesome. No.
So, but those are the 2 that stick out. In college, I don't know if I have, you know, one that really, I think one for me at UC was when we beat the Miami Hurricanes in Nippert.
Yeah.
You know, and they, you know, and they came to UC and, you know, we beat them. That was a big one, you know, and I think when I was at Mount St. Joe and we won the conference championship in 2009, that was a nice, you know, a nice memory. But those 2 games. Now, are there other games in Anderson that stand out? Yeah, sure. When we beat Harrison in '91 in double overtime, you know, that that was a big win, but those two, because no one gave us a chance to beat Princeton and no one gave us a chance to beat Moeller, except for the people at Anderson.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Vince, I was the last question I was going to ask you, but I think you've pretty much summed it up all in this interview. We Steve and I know because we live in Anderson. We've been around. We still do a lot of things for Anderson. I was going to ask you why it's so special in Anderson, but I think this.
No, I want to answer that question.
All right.
I do.
Go ahead and give it to me.
Here's what I found out when I came to Anderson. First of all, I really liked the community itself. I liked the community. I just liked the way it was and the resources that it had to raise two children and what it brought to your family, being able to have access to so many things. But the thing that really jumped off the chart to me was how nice the people were. And I tell this story, coming from a small town, there's a world of difference between Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. And I hope, so if there's somebody from Pittsburgh listening to this, I'm not trying to offend you. There's a world of difference in the mental approach of the way the people are in Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. The Cincinnati people are much more laid back, almost like a little bit of Southern hospitality in my mind, what I saw. Where the Pittsburgh people are a little more New Yorkish, kind of aggressive, in your face a little bit. And again, I don't mean to knock, it's a different climate. And I had the only big city I'd ever been in growing up in Martins Ferry, and then as a young coach when we would go to clinics in Pittsburgh. And the people were really a lot really different. For me, it really kind of made me feel uncomfortable. And so when I came to Cincinnati, I thought that's how the people were going to be. And when I got in here, remember when we had the mall, I'll never forget walking in the mall and people coming by you and saying hi to you, how are you? And you didn't even know who they were, and they didn't know you. That never happened at the Pittsburgh Mall, ever. And, like that just struck me, like these people are really nice people. And then when I got involved, with the boosters and football moms and, that kind of stuff, and realized you two guys, your parents, what nice people they were, it just, that was why I stayed. Right. I had opportunities to go other places, but that was why I stayed. It was the people. Yeah.
Awesome.
And
that's why I'm still here now.
Yeah. And I would have to say that's probably why Steve and I are still here too. I mean, we obviously love our community and love everything about it. And Vince, I know for me, I love everything that you've done for us, for the football program, and really, really appreciate everything you've done. And hopefully you'll continue to keep doing some great things. And hopefully you and I can still continue to do the pregame and halftime show. But I know the people of Anderson are very, very appreciative of what you've done and what you've meant to this community.
Well, that goes twofold. I'm very appreciative of the people and the athletes that I had the pleasure of coaching, the students that I had the pleasure of teaching, the parents that I had a chance to build friendships with and be involved with. I mean, those things are dear to my heart that I will never, ever forget these people. And, that's what it's all about.
I love it. Well, Vince, we really appreciate it. We on a short notice here, getting us taken of, and on Thanksgiving weekend. So really appreciate Steve. Been a great time tonight, hasn't it?
It's just awesome. I mean, Vince is such a great guy, easy to talk to, but in all seriousness, just a living legend. And you can be bashful about it all you want because I never even played football, and I know the impact that I feel towards you and what you've done for this community. And so on behalf of me, let alone anybody else, Danny, in the football program, we're so thankful that you're a part of Anderson.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be a part of Anderson. Thank you.
No, we appreciate it. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. So for Steve Ellis, Vince Suriano, Dan Albers, you've been watching This Week in Anderson. We'll catch you next week.